story. I look like a crazy man in this room. Look at it. All this fucking focus, yeah. Just notes all over the place. Oh, lunatic man. Yeah, I look like a crazy person in this room. It's just like fucking paper everywhere and books everywhere, and yeah, that's life. And barbell. Generally not someone to just kind of study for exams, like my general kind of not study for exams, but that my general kind of study philosophy, you could say, focuses more on understanding information and linking it all together and being able to apply it and see where it fits in and really understand it and read around it and do broader study as opposed to just on the curriculum. Like, that's kind of how I try to learn. It's kind of obvious, like it's what you should be doing, you know, not just rote learning, memorizing things for the sake of it. So then when it does kind of come to exam time, I have to ask myself, okay, like what are you actually going to be tested on, you know, in the exam, because you need to pass your exams, do well in your exams. So a little bit more refining. A good example of that is, like, you know, we study pharmacology, which is basically drugs, medicine, how drugs work, what they're used for, etc. And you know, if you were to actually read like clinical guidelines of how different medicines are used and stuff like that, and the hierarchy of, you know, how you'd make a certain choice as to what drug would be used in a given context, it mightn't necessarily, it's not reflected in the way that we learn it at times. And, you know, we have a few pharmacists in our class, and, you know, they'll kind of be giggling in class like, oh Jesus, like, because you know that you're being kind of taught things that, yeah, you have to go through and learn this, but at the same time, you're probably never going to see this drug in practice, or this drug doesn't get used anymore, or this drug is useless versus that drug, or whatever. So yeah, that's one of the things I kind of make the effort to do, is like when I'm studying any of the subjects that we are studying, I try to really understand, right, where does this knowledge actually fit into like how I will actually be using it, you know, like in the future, how am I actually going to use this knowledge, and hence how much effort I'm going to put into studying a given thing. Because like related to pharmacology, if you're studying pharmacology and you already know that, all right, 20% of these drugs are not used clinically, 20% of them are used clinically all of the time, and it's really important that you understand them, then clearly it makes a lot of sense to focus more on the ones that are used a lot clinically, as opposed to solely studying everything equally just for the sake of exams. That's just one example. There's many other places in which kind of that thought process applies. Another one would be, you know, pathology, for example. Like, we do a lot of pathology, basically, where you're trying to understand different disease mechanisms, how they're going to appear on a slide, like from a histology perspective, what the tissue looks like, different mutations and stuff that might be associated with that disease, for example, a certain type of cancer or something like that. So that's kind of pathology, basically, like, right, what makes this disease happen, what is this disease, like, what are the features, etc. And obviously in that context, it makes a lot more sense to understand all of the things that you're likely to be seeing all of the time, as opposed to focusing an equal amount of your attention to very, very rare types of cancers, let's say, that you're unlikely to see in clinical practice, or that you might see once or twice in your career, you know. So trying to, as a student, kind of really focus in on what are the key things, what am I going to see, what's important, etc. That's the way I try to kind of conceptualize my study, and then try to link all of the different subjects together. That's how I think about things. And like, if there's a particular area that I happen to be more interested in, so for example, like from first year at least, like the cardiology stuff is definitely of more interest to me. So for me, like, we don't probably go into enough depth on some of the things that I would be quite interested in. Like, for example, atherosclerosis, like, that's something I'm really interested in. both from the perspective of, you know, prevention, in terms of like, all right, what's the role of things like, let's say, diet, exercise, lifestyle, genetics, etc. Like, what are the role of those variables? What's the pathophysiology? And then obviously like the treatment perspective in terms of like what drugs actually work, how does nutrition factor into this, etc., etc. But you know, there's kind of like you might get like one lecture that's dedicated to that, even though if you were to go onto a website like, let's say, the European Atherosclerosis Society, you could find tens and tens and tens of lectures, and if you're obviously to go and read their guidelines and stuff, you can find so much more information that isn't necessarily taught to us. So for me, I like to go out and seek that information and read far more about that stuff that I think is really interesting and really important, obviously, as opposed to focusing all of my study time strictly on the curriculum and equally dividing my attention among all of the subjects, among all of the topics that are raised, etc. Because again, coming back to the point that the goal of studying is not just to do better in an exam, it's to have, you know, applicable knowledge, and knowledge that is comprehensive and that is useful, and also just like from a kind of a fun and an interest perspective, to put more of your attention into the things that you enjoy. Obviously, if you're talking about something like medicine, you don't want that to be the detriment of your knowledge of other things, of course. But yeah, that's just some of my thoughts, because when I show a video of like all my notes on the wall, I feel a bit disingenuous, because like that's not really me. Like I'm not that type of person that's really comprehensive in terms of like making notes and learning them off and having like, you know, different mnemonics and strategies for remembering things and riddles and like memorization strategies. Essentially, I've never been that type of person, and that for that reason, when people ask me like for study tips, I'm like, look, man or woman, I don't know. Like I'm not the person to go to for study tips, because the main reason that I would the main reason that I would justify or explain my ability to learn things is mostly through interest. Like if I'm interested in something, I'll, you know, get obsessed about it and try and learn more about it, and can be very intrinsically motivated, you could say, in terms of like self-leading my learning if I'm interested in something, and that takes you quite far. If you're like just interest in and of itself, like stay fucking interested, like that takes you so far. And I'm very interested in pretty much like everything that we're learning about, but in terms of like actual study strategies, like not your guy. I'm not your guy. So yeah, that's why I wanted to explain that a bit, because yeah, people always ask for study tips, and I'm like, sorry, like I'm not your guy. So all my notes that are kind of stuck up on the wall there's no particular technique. It's just me like, right, I've got an A4 sheet, write down what you think is important in this lecture, you know, that kind of stuff. Or like, to be honest, about 50% of the stuff that's on that wall is charts that have been made by other people, not me. So download them, look at them. And yeah, that's my incredibly interesting and comprehensive and unique study philosophy and strategies. Yeah, really nothing special to it. I always just say to people, look, be interested, and that's about it. And the other thing is that this is kind of like a feed forward cycle as well, in that if you never study something, or you just never put in the effort, like if you, let's say you went through the whole semester and you never paid attention, it's not going to be interesting to you. Like no subject is going to be interesting to you, because you don't know enough about it for it to be interesting. And that's the thing, that, you know, the effort and the study often actually precedes your development of interest. So for that reason, you can't just like listen to what I said there and think, okay, Gary said just be interested, but I'm interested in none of my subjects, so I'm not going to study them. Because you have to actually take a couple of steps forward before you get that interest coming to you. Because it's kind of like when you start to learn, let's say a few different things in isolation, and suddenly you're like, oh, I know enough to be able to link these things together now, then it's like, boom, now that's interesting. Now I can see the relevance of this. Now I'm interested, and now I want to learn more. So there's initial kind, you need to initially develop some sort of like a momentum or inertia to kind of carry you forward, because if you don't develop that initial momentum, then you never actually have the prerequisite level of knowledge for it to be interesting. Because when you don't know about anything, it's not really interesting, because it's just like, oh yeah, well that's complicated. Whereas when you're able to put some of the details together and you're like, oh, this is starting to make sense. Okay, you know, I can see how the biochemistry links to the pharmacology and links to the pathology and links to the physiology and the anatomy, etc. That's when it's like, oh, nice, I'm starting to get this. This is cool. So yeah, I'm not going to ramble any further. That's just some of my thoughts on studying, because basically that's pretty much all I'm doing at the moment. So it's very much fresh on my mind. Cooking some breakfast here. I'm having leftover chicken from last night's dinner and potatoes. So chicken, potatoes, gonna have that. I'm gonna have a steak with some sort of chili seasoning on it, so some steak, and I'm gonna have a lot of vegetables. Yeah, so Saturday, normally Monday to Friday I kind of have the same breakfast, some sort of porridge for my breakfast, and then at the weekend I'll tend to kind of change it up, maybe some eggs or something like that, eggs, veg, maybe pancakes every now and then, but for today we've got that leftover from dinner, and have some steak and vegetables. So I said, yeah, do you know what, make a good old feed out of that. And to be honest, like I'm not really someone who like stresses too much about having particular food preferences for particular times of day. I love breakfast at dinner time and I love dinner at breakfast time, so yeah, that's me, guys. Gonna cook that up and watch this video guy I follow on YouTube. Brain Book is the name of the channel. He's a neurosurgeon, and I think neurosurgery is pretty fucking cool, so I like watching his videos. Yeah. Leftover chicken, man, unreal.
Broadly, and then if there's more appetite for this, we can go into each one of these in depth and separate on and so forth. But compared to when you're working, there is significantly more free time to try and things wrong. Once you start to show your face, we can start to break.
I told a lie.
At this point,
I also added in 3 eggs to my breakfast, so there you go. Steak, chicken, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, 3 eggs, and I got my veg cooking up there now, about 400 grams I think of veg, roughly 400 grams somewhere between there. So yeah, that's like, what's it, that's about 5 servings of vegetables, which is typically classified as being 80 grams. So yeah, 5 servings of veg, plenty of animal foods. Basically I'm just going to eat 2 meals today. I'm going to have my breakfast and I'm going to have my dinner later on, so I'm trying to knock out a large portion or proportion of my protein and vegetable intake for the day at this first meal. So no, I don't normally have steak and chicken and eggs, but yeah, that's just the thinking here. Is the goal is to, you know, have this sit down, study for most of the day, and basically just be full until dinner time. There you go, guys. We've also got some leftover homemade curry sauce from last night, so I'm gonna fling that on there, because why the fuck not, you know? Delicious, absolutely delicious, lads. That's fucking breakfast. That's what you call a breakfast, folks. Absolutely delicious. Yes, yes, yes. Right, I'm gonna put this camera down so I can scoop out the rest of that, and I'm gonna enjoy my grub.